Audio unleashed.
So this is going to be our special BS issue.
No,
they're all not.
What makes that different from a normal episode of Audio
We're
Unleashed?
going to look at at audio BS from two different angles. We're going to look at it from the promotion of ideas on YouTube that are preposterous and wrong, but yet widespread, widely held, just completely unsupportable. And then we're also going to look at a product that is utterly bogus, and we're going to talk about how we are on a quest to probably futile to bring some rationality into the world of audio. But that's been our purpose since day one of the Audio
Unleashed
podcast.
Yeah.
And then what are we're going to talk about a different product, though, but we're going to talk about two other products as well. But do we think better of those products? Maybe. Let's stop being so vague, man. Let's talk about what we're jumping into first is a video on YouTube that I found from a channel called Michael's Hi-Fi Audio Adventures. Okay. Now, Michael's Hi-Fi Audio Adventures is apparently quite a young channel, 2,000 subscribers, a few thousand views. Yeah, I mean, you look, they've got more views than we do, but I think this guy's going to be huge on YouTube because he tells people what they want to hear. So in this video specifically, he is talking about why you should never unplug your hi-fi gear, and he gives a lot of reasons for it. So we're gonna discuss those reasons. We're gonna maybe deconstruct those reasons, and we're gonna give our thoughts on those reasons. We're gonna examine the science behind his conclusions.
Yeah. And what's next?
That'll be a short discussion.
There is none.
And then next, so we're going to talk about a product that came out a couple of years ago that we only just discovered, I think because someone was foolish enough to push this on my Facebook page. It's called the Less Loss Firewall for loudspeakers. And we have a review here by Daweed GRZYB. I'm not sure if I can pronounce that.
I don't think we would do justice to it if we tried.
I think dude needs to buy a vowel. Listen, Hi-Fi Kings, which is a site from Poland, which is surprisingly quite a hotspot for high-end audio, as anybody who's been to the Warsaw Hi-Fi show knows. This is an interesting product. It was also covered on sixmoons.com, which is a very, very well-established audio website going back, 20 years? Long time. And this product purports to... Man, it is hard to figure out what it purports to do except make your system sound better.
Well, there's copper stuff, meta.
We'll delve into the electrical theory behind... Well, actual electrical things. Then we'll see if any of that actually applies to this device. And then next up, we're going to have So you sent me this thing from Stereophile. Jason Victor Cernas did coverage. Was this show coverage? Yeah, this show coverage.
Show coverage. Yeah. What show was he at, by the way?
Well, he said every show.
The Show 2023.
The Show, the one that was in LA. Yeah. Jason is at every show. Literally every show.
So this is about MC Audio-Tech's new TL12 loudspeaker. Very interesting loudspeaker. So I think we're going to have some fun things to say about this. We've got another YouTube video to mention as well, but this time I think maybe we're not going to be quite so critical. This is a brand new speaker, but I kind of have history going back with this speaker design like 30 years. And it's a good history. It's warm and fuzzy memories of my 30s. Yeah.
And then last for our Patreon. What's that?
I don't even remember my 30s.
Oh.
Anyway.
Plus, you went to too many Grateful Dead concerts.
That's it.
But, while I was working at video magazine and home theater magazines, I was completely focused on audio and video, mostly audio. And so I very well remember my 30s. 20s, not so much. But our last segment, which is going to be for our Patreon subscribers only, is a discussion of a brand new amplifier that is the weirdest looking amplifier I've ever seen. It's called the Harty-Chi 723. I don't think it's I guess it's from Blue Circle Audio, which is a company that has a reputation for making some pretty weird stuff.
It's Hitachi.
Yeah, Hitachi.
Yeah, it's Hitachi. So basically, it's a riff on Hitachi, but Hitachi. Yeah,
from Angela-Gilbert Yeung, the person who did Blue Circle Audio. I found this on Facebook on one of the Facebook audio forums. I either I cover or somebody pushes on me. I don't know. And went and looked at this and was just fascinated. It's the weirdest amp I've ever seen, but it has a fascinating and potentially valid, technical, I don't want to say breakthrough, but feature.
Surprisingly for not a lot of money. So
it's like that
makes it even more intriguing.
Yeah, it's kind of a normal product with a lot of weird cosmetic stuff and one significant technical, little kick in there that actually might make a difference. So let's just say you're Dennis Berger and I'm Brent Butterworth. Since we're not going to do the long introductions anymore, since somebody complained.
You're Brent Butterworth. Well, I was going to bring that up. Actually, we got a comment on our Facebook, on our YouTube page, from a listener named Philippe Regnier. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he said, "Hey guys, really loving the show. Thanks for the content and the vibe. On the flip side, please stop introducing each other. It's getting old." And so,
you know what? If you want to know who we are, just Google us, okay?
Real quick, one last thing before we dig into today's topics. I think you had something you wanted a little tribute that you wanted to give.
Yeah,
right?
we just heard the really sad news that Gary Merson passed away, and Gary was he was kind of like the really sort of super high profile journalist covering HGTV issues from I'd say probably the late 90s up until about probably 10 years ago or something. And he founded a site called HD Guru, and he was at everything. He was at like every press event. He was at every, and he had a long history in the consumer electronics industry. I think actually Sandy Gross hired him at one point.
Really? I didn't know
if I have that right. Yes. Or at least he and Sandy Gross of Definitive and Golden Ear and founder and former Polk co-founder, I think had a long professional relationship with him. And Gary was both an absolutely top-notch journalist. I mean, he was the guy who would ask the really tough questions that would make all the marketing managers nervous, and that they usually didn't have the answers to, but they realized that everybody realized they needed to know the answer to that question, and they didn't.
Yep.
And he was just always, he was among the best of us. He was so much, because, journalists, a lot of times it's a gig, you do your best and you go home, and he was not like that. He was super ultra hardcore, and, he the funny thing was he was just sort of a terror to the PR people, but they all loved him because he was just super gregarious and kind of loudmouthed, frankly, character.
He had a lot of personality. Yeah.
He had a colossal amount of personality. And I remember, once in a while he called me on the phone to talk about something, and that was going to be at least an hour phone call. And he was famous because after an hour, you'd be kind of like, dude, I gotta go do some stuff. And he'd be like, but one more thing.
Yeah.
And he just had so much energy and spirit and so much personality, and he was such a character, and he just, I don't think he really just cared what anybody thought of him at all. But he was, honestly, the funny thing was, he as outspoken as he was and as relentless as he was, he didn't have a mean bone in his body. He was a really sweet guy.
Yeah.
And he hasn't really been around a lot for the last several years. And although hdguru.com, the site he founded, is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking, like a couple months ago, I was like, God, I really miss having Gary around. Like, I never see him anymore. And,
he's had health struggles for quite a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. And people like that are why I'm in this industry.
Yeah.
I was in the computer industry for a little while. There are no Gary Mersons in the computer industry.
No. Yeah. And I have to say, Gary could take it as well as he could give it. If you picked on him, he would get a little gleam in his eye and grin and be like, oh boy, I've got a sparring partner. Good. There's nothing you could say that could really upset him or hurt his feelings. So
yeah. So Gary, if you somehow are listening to the Audio
Unleashed
podcast up in heaven, we miss you. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Should we talk about speakers or something?
I don't think we're going to do speakers. I think we're going to talk about YouTube.
Oh, yeah, that guy. Okay, good.
Yeah.
You'll like this one, Gary.
Yeah. So like I said, Michael's Hi-Fi Audio Adventures is a YouTube channel that is up and coming, 2,000-ish subscribers. But I think this guy's going to be huge. And I think the reason he's going to be huge is he is telling people what they want to hear. So this video is basically exploring, it's not just the issue of should you unplug your hi-fi system. It's exploring the whole notion of plug-in and break-in and break-in of cables and things like that. And the conclusion that he reaches is that, if you unplug your audio system and then plug it back in, it's just going to sound completely different. And he has listened to all of these components for hundreds of hours and he could tell you for sure. And if you have a problem with that, and if you say, these people can't hear it, then you're a bad person because, his listeners, his viewers are special and they can hear things that you can't. So you can't contradict them.
So can I raise a hypothetical here? This is an example. Let's take famed audio writer Michael Fremer, who I think the Washington Post called the dean of audio writers. They didn't ask any audio writers, but whatever. So Michael Fremer, let's say he is in his New Jersey listening room, famed New Jersey listening room with extensive electrical grounding, and he belches. Can I hear that from my home in the Seattle metro area?
I think, according to Michael's Hi-Fi, if you claim you can, then I'm not allowed to say that you can't. But I'm going to say that you can't.
I can't.
So I'm also going to say that you can't hear frequencies above, 40,000 hertz or 128 million hertz, or you can't hear RF.
Okay, but how do we know? How do we know I can't hear Michael belching in his listening room 2,800 miles away?
But because we understand physics and we understand the way sound propagates, and we understand inverse square laws, and
we know his belch is going to be at 65 dB, right? Average belching, volume, SPL, and we know it's going to degrade.
Wait, have you measured that?
I have not. I've not actually. I actually know Michael pretty well. I've not heard him belch. Anyway, so we know that sound's going to decay at 6 dB per, with every doubling of distance, right? And so what that tells you is pretty quickly it's going to get swamped in all the other noises around us, wind noise and things like that, right? And so the actual amount of energy that would travel from Michael, it's good. Let's say he's got a window open, and it goes through the window unimpeded. All right, so we'll get rid of that problem. And let's say it's just purely outdoors, which is, aside from some ground and tree reflections, going to be mostly kind of close to anechoic. Yeah. It's going to decay at 6 dB per doubling of distance. So pretty quickly, if you're a block away, you're not going to probably hear it. It's going to be swamped by the noise around you, right? And then for it to travel 2,800 miles, which will also take the sound like a few hours. By the time it gets here, it's going to be so swamped in other stuff, and it's going to be down the level, decaying at 6 dB for every doubling of distance, we know that the level is going to be completely unmeasurable. It's going to be completely swamped in noise. So we understand the basics of all this, right? So we can tell people what they can hear and what they can't hear. Now, can I tell someone that you can't hear the difference if you put your speakers on really good stands? No, I cannot tell them that. And I wouldn't tell them that, right? Because it's possible. There are mechanisms by which, depending on the speaker, depending on the stand, something, yada, yada, you could damp some vibration in the speaker and it could make an audible difference, right? Okay.
Yeah.
But the things he's talking about are turning are leaving your system plugged in or not.
Mm-hmm.
And, we know that these components come up to temperature really fast. If you play your amp for a little bit, the heat sink's going to be warm if you have a, standard class AB amp or whatever, right? And there's absolutely zero scientific evidence. I mean, there has been, if you look in Floyd Toole's book, Sound Reproduction, the Acoustics and Psychoacoustics of Loudspeakers in Rooms. Mm-hmm. Very famous book. And we'll have a link to that. If you need it, if you don't already have it, you probably already have it. If you look in that book, Floyd pretty clearly lays out what people can hear and what they can't hear. And that's all backed up by science. It's all backed up by tests. Anybody can say, I can sit here and say in Seattle, I can hear Michael Fremer's belch when it arrives at my home X number of hours later. I could even say I hear it completely at the same exact time he does it, because Michael, being the dean of high-end audio writers,
there's quantum entanglement going on.
That allows the sound, quantum entanglement that allows the sound to travel instantaneously. I mean, haven't you read Einstein? But anyway.
Spooky action at a distance, he called it.
Right. Anybody can say anything, and anybody can say, "Oh, my system." And he says he unplugged the system for like a week or two because he was ill or something like that, and he turned the power strip off, not the power strip, the power conditioner off for a couple of weeks, and he came back and it sounded terrible. And it's like, no, it didn't. It didn't sound. Did it sound measurably different than the way it did before? No.
Yeah.
But can you hear things that you can't measure? Maybe sometimes, but or at least that are really hard and confusing to measure. But look, no, it's just you don't go for your system doesn't get. Look, if you measure the same system and it measures the same, all right. If you measure, say, the frequency response and distortion and all the other different parameters we can measure, and it's the same both times, and you say, "Oh, it's trash," one time, it's like, no, you're wrong. You're just wrong. You're dead or wrong.
Or there's something else going on. I mean, look, I know I've told this story before.
From an emotional and psychological standpoint, or an engineering standpoint? Okay.
From an emotional, psychological standpoint, I've told this story before, but there was my mother-in-law was visiting a couple of years back, and while I was out of the room in the bathroom, she turned the lights up in the room. It was not enough of a change in the intensity of the light for me to notice that the room was brighter. But when I sat down and started listening, I was like, something doesn't sound right. My system sounds wrong. Right. And eventually I figured out, something's wrong with the lights. And I set it to my preferred level. And all of a sudden my system sounded right. Now, all of that was in my brain. And the thing is, I'm not even saying, you need to get a dimmer switch for your lights in your room because it affects the way, your room sounds. No, I can't say that. All I can say is it affects the way I perceive the audiovisual experience, right? So there are all manner of things that affect what you think you hear and how you perceive the quality of your system.
Yeah.
But this guy is not leaving open any room for the possibility of that. He is framing everything in very objectivist language. He talks about these rigorous tests where I put it on and I don't listen for 10 hours. And then I listen and I go listen to other systems and I come back at 20 hours and I go back and listen to other systems and I come back at 30 hours. And these speakers don't sound good until the 800 hour mark. And this DAC doesn't sound good until the 400 hour mark. And it's all very, very couched in objectivist language, and that infuriates me because what he is doing is pandering to his. Yeah. Oh, we'll get to that. Hang on. But yeah. I think we all need to be aware of how our psychology and how our other senses affect how we perceive this stuff, and stop ascribing it to stupid crap like, oh, I unplugged my system and now the same electrons will never touch it again. I don't know. I don't even know what mechanism could possibly explain this, but man, look at your own head before you start blaming spooky bull crap, man.
Yeah, but the amp warming up. But I was kind of going with my mention of Floyd Toole. Floyd talks about speaker break-in, and which is something that people are convinced exists, and it always seems to take 100 hours. But they actually have studied it, and Floyd and his crew, some of the world's most accomplished audio researchers, found that besides a pretty quick, speakers do have some physical break-in to do of the surround and the spider, right? The parts that move, and once those parts, just as if you have a starched shirt on, it'll sort of break in as you move around in it, right? But it doesn't take long for the surround and the spider to get to their target compliance, and then they kind of sit there, and you're talking about a matter of minutes. I remember Peter Tribeman, who's a speaker manufacturer. A lot of us know he's retired now, mostly, but he would he would bring me his speakers for review, and he'd be like, "Oh, let me break them in real quick," and he'd walk up to the woofer and just push the woofer in with his hand, and it's like, that's what you're doing when you're breaking in speakers. And the only problem is you can't pull the woofer out. You need to pull it both ways, really. Right. But still, it's something. But, besides that kind of initial break-in, their speaker break-in is non-existent. And, Tyle Hertson's the dean of audio headphone reviewers. And that's according to Brent and Dennis, who was described.
Did we poll them?
No,
is that official?
But I say so. And I was described by Forbes as headphone reviewer extraordinaire.
Oh,
so
nice.
I was.
Nice.
By Jeff Morrison, who's a friend of mine who wrote for Forbes. But so I have credibility, and Tyle, look, anyone with a half a brain, and I think any intelligent headphone reviewer is who's old enough to remember Tyle is going to be like, yeah, he was the dean of headphone reviewers. Anyway, he did some pretty lengthy experiments, and he got like what headphone was it? AKG, one of the really expensive open back ones. And he got 2 models, fresh from the factory, and he broke one of them in, and he left one of them straight out of the box. And he had someone put them on him from behind and go back and forth. And he had like the same piece of techno music playing. All right. So unlike a real situation, something that would quickly reveal the difference. And he heard like a very small difference. And he basically concluded like, yeah, this doesn't matter. So, the people that actually research this stuff, that actually put work into learning about audio as opposed to sitting there in your underwear listening to stuff and going, oh, I hear this.
Yeah.
The people that actually do the work have concluded break-in is not an issue. And then by extension, leaving your gear on or not leaving it on. And by the way, a typical Class A/B amp doesn't have any idle current going on. It's got a hard switch on it that turns the power off and on, right?
Yeah.
There is no power going to your transistors or your power supply or anything like that with a typical traditional Class A/B amp. That's a hard power switch, right? Yeah, there are some that have microprocessor controlled power switches and things like that, where there is a little bit of what they call housekeeping current going on in there just to keep a couple things active. But it's not keeping the transistors warm. It's not keeping any significant current flowing through anything.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is just such a bunch of baloney. If you had a typical Class A/B amp that had, let's say it's chewing up, 10 watts on the bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
It will stay slightly hot if you leave it turned on all the time with no signal going through it, because there is a little bit of, there's a few watts of bias going through it at all times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who was it? B&K, their amps used to run kind of a little warm like that, and they sounded really good. And, you know, those, if you left them on all the time, yeah, they'd probably sound better for the first minute, maybe I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I remember, but this goes back to, I remember reading, you know, J. Gordon Holt in Stereophile did a review of Boulder amplifiers in like the early 90s. And he's talking about how they don't sound good. And I revered Gordon, but Gordon had some pretty ooky things to say about audio sometimes.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was talking about how, you know, it takes 2 hours before these amps sound like something worthy of review in this magazine. I'm kind of like, oh, for God's sake, come on, give me a break. You know, I remember some reader wrote in and trashed him, and his response was, well, would that it were not so.
Ooh. So this Michael's Hi-Fi Audio Adventures guy talks about a DAC that took 800 hours before it sounded good. And the question that I would want to ask him is, what changed, right? And why did it stop changing at 800 hours, right? What is it that those 800 hours of, what's that?
Well, apparently he changed the tubes in it.
Yeah, but even after he changed the tubes in it, it was like 800 hours of listening, and he would check in every 25 hours, and it didn't sound good. And then magically at the 800-hour mark, it suddenly sounded good. Yeah. But so what was changing? You know, and let's ignore the changing the tubes. Once they had the new tubes in place, the 800 hours after that, what was changing? And then what made it stop changing? What made it stabilize and go, okay, this is just what I sound like now?
Oh, we don't know. It's the orientation of the current in the wire crystal structure in the wires inside the amp. And the DAC and the orientation of the crystal structure in the DAC chip, and that
maybe
has
it's
to
the skin
have
effect.
X amount of. It's probably the skin effect, which means high frequencies travel at more efficiently on the outside of a cable, which is true at radio frequencies.
Right, right.
I don't think it happens inside a DAC. And also, it's never been shown to have... I mean, it's a significant problem in RF applications. But...
I was just joking because the next product that we're going to talk about... The next product we're going to talk about does something with the skin effect. I don't know. I was trying to make a segue, man. I'm not as good at segues as you are. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I think I saw the skin effect thing, but as soon as people say skin effect to me, I'm just like, whatever. And I ignore it. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So just when people mention musicians I don't especially care for, and they talk about them with reverence, I just turn off immediately. Right.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think of a good example of that won't offend you.
The Eagles.
Oh, actually, no, the Eagles. No, it's too easy of a target.
Okay,
Radiohead. Let's go with Radiohead. I'm sorry, we probably lost half of our listeners right there. I never got it. And as soon as people start talking about Radiohead to me, I'm kind of like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. I never got the appeal.
That's fine.
So.
They don't suck, but I don't get it.
Yeah, no, they're not bad. It's just I don't understand what makes them good. So, yeah.
Well, let's come back and talk about skin effect. Things we can explain. Not Radiohead, things we can't. This is Audio
Unleashed.
And we are here to talk about, what were you saying about science just now? That was kind of good.
Yeah. I was saying that spewing sciencey sounding words does not mean you actually understand science. So, which I think is going to be a recurring theme in this segment.
Well, we're going to be talking about a product that HiFiNights.com says you could easily spend more and get less in return. So this piqued my interest. a line that's in literally 10,000 other audio reviews. But this thing is called the Less Loss Firewall for Loudspeakers. And this came to my attention, I'm pretty sure, from Facebook, some Facebook group, or maybe some PR person was pushing it or something. I don't know. But I found this review, and it's a few years old. But I wasn't aware of this product. I was aware of this company called Less Loss, which makes a lot of... Is kooky a good word?
I think it's pretty fair.
It's some stuff that has... let's just say, questionable scientific merit. Is that too kind?
I don't have many questions. I mean,
you're going to help me figure out. I can't quite figure out what this thing is supposed to do. It's called the Less Loss Firewall for Loudspeakers, and you connect it between at the end of your loudspeaker cables and then into your loudspeaker. And it's supposed to serve as a firewall. And that's good, because that prevents, like, if your engine explodes, then the fire from the engine doesn't get through to you because your car has a firewall. And if your computer has a firewall, then it's less likely to get viruses, right? So firewalls must be good. So this is protecting your speaker from... what, Dennis?
Well, the best description I could find is in neither of the articles that you sent me. It was not on Hi-Fi Nights. It was not on Six Moons, because neither of those really explained anything about how this thing is supposed to work. But if you go to the lessloss.com website, here's an explanation. It is less loss skin filtering based on the laws of nature. By specially treating the wire surface where noise resides, we render it conductive only to the necessary low frequencies, but not to high ones, thus suppressing these noisy high frequencies to levels so low that they are effectively eliminated as a source of noise pollution. And the frequencies that they're talking about range from like 40 to 50 megahertz. This one is they're saying the skin effect, the things that the RF noise that this eliminates is coming from like garage door openers, which are operated 40 to 50 megahertz, and TV stations and radio stations and cell phones and GPS navigation and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and microwaves and
there's so much RF out there.
Yeah, I know, but basically that's what it boils down to. I guess what they have determined is that RF filtering, if they come right out and say we're filtering RF frequency noise, then Brent and Dennis are going to mock us on Audio Unleashed. So we're not going to say that. We're just going to describe it as that. But yeah, basically, when it boils right down to it, they are filtering frequencies above 200,000 hertz from the skin of the cable, I think.
Okay, so the skin effects of the high frequencies travel, they migrate to the high frequency noise migrates to the outside of the cable, and then it hits this thing, and this thing kills the RF noise, right?
Above 200,000 hertz. Yeah.
Cool.
So
yeah.
So how do they think speakers work?
Well, they think, this is a common problem that we have with a lot of people that make doohickeys that go between your amp and your speaker. And granted, if your amp has a lot of noise, which we hear as hiss usually, that's a problem. And your solution to that is get a better amp, right? With it, but in normal situations, amps don't have any normal amp from any normal company doesn't have a significant and troublesome amount of noise. Okay. There are a few, but they're really weird tube amps or super ultra cheap Class D things that are like $20 or whatever. I mean, I've tested a bunch of those things. And a couple of them are a little noisy. And then, the speaker cables also don't, I mean, yes, theoretically they do pick up RF noise, right? They serve as antennas. However, that noise is at some tiny fraction of your speaker signal. I mean, speakers are playing, usually a few watts of power at a time is going through that cable. It could be 100, but usually it's more like 2 or 3 or something like that. Whereas radio frequency signals coming off of an antenna are like microwatts typically. Yeah. I mean, they're really, I can't remember off the top of my head. I really should, but it's just some tiny fraction of a signal. And I'm sorry, Michael dude from Audio Adventures, I know that you can't hear that because I know what an audible noise floor is. And the amp's noise floor is going to be higher than that. And the amp's noise floor is not audible unless you have a really bad amp, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to block any of this noise. Now, second of all, let's describe what these things actually are. What's inside the firewall for loudspeakers?
Do you understand it? Because it's like what, 4 copper bars, or I mean, are those cable? Yeah. I don't know. There's like a weird. They're suspended on this sort of weird framework kind of thing that almost makes each of these individual cores sort of hover. Kind of, I mean, it looks really cool, to be honest, and it's all made in.
It looks like a fuel filter, is what it looks like.
Oh yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
it looks just like a fuel filter. If your fuel filter was clear on the outside.
Yeah. They call it the heart. But yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's just like, well, this looks cool, so it must do something. And they do a thing on their page where it's like, oh, the guys that make this make it in a crazy machine, and they have to wear hazmat suits and blah blah blah, and it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all hand wavy. I'll tell you how I can
I didn't
confidently
see the hazmat suits part.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
I'll tell you how I can confidently say that. I mean, it's. We always have to be careful about making claims because we don't know everything. But I'll tell you one sign that's always a big red flag for me. If you have graphs and you've got an x-axis and a y-axis on your graph, and they're not labeled, then I'm pretty sure that what you're selling me is garbage. And there's a lot of that going on here.
Describe this graph.
Well,
where's this graph
in the manufacturer page, they've got a thing where there's level on one axis and frequency on the other, and they're showing the typical filters, mountains and valleys of frequency response when you're using resistors and capacitors and coils, and it's all this squiggy little thing, but they don't tell you what the range of the level is. They don't tell you what the frequencies are. So it's just kind of somebody drawing a squiggly line. And then they've got their own graph of, we don't use capacitors and we don't use coils. And here's our graph, and a level and frequency again. And they've got more of a smooth sloping line, but we don't know if they're to the same scale because we don't have units. We don't know what levels these are. Is this 0 dB to 2 dB, or is it 0 dB to 100 dB? I mean, what is the scale? And what is?
It's just their subjective perceptions, like charting their subjective perceptions. Maybe. Wow, it's like a mood ring for audio, sort of.
Or it's like the stock market. I've heard the stock market described as a graph of rich people's feelings. It's pretty much kind of like that. There's a graph in the Six Moons article that is just like, you look at it and you're like, oh, they measured something, and then you read it and you realize they didn't, because again, we've got a graph with no actual measurements here. It's quality on one axis and time on the other. And then you read it and it's like, for the first 3 days or so after initial connection, fluctuations are quite wild. Inexplicably, the second day is the worst. And it's just like, okay, but what's the scale here? How did you measure this quality? And it's not, it's just like, this is how I felt. I felt like it improved kind of like this. So people, if you want to reduce this entire segment to one takeaway, if you ever see a graph, look at the axes in the graph and see if they're actually delineated or if it's just sort of, I don't know, here's time and here's quality and whatever. It's meaningless.
So so I'm looking at a picture of these things on sixmoons.com, and they are, so it's these kind of heavy copper bars, which are treated with some fantastical treatment that makes them extra special. But they're copper bars. They look like they're, I don't know, maybe somewhere around 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters, something like that. And so you got a couple of these, like 4 copper bars in this framework thing. And each one of them has this fuel filter thing like around it, which I don't know what it is, but basically the electrical current is going through these copper bars. And it's supposed to be kind of like you put this on the end of your speaker cable, and it's got it doesn't have, and they're talking about how it doesn't have, capacitance, and it doesn't, heavy copper bars have, negligible inductance. And they have, if they're heavy copper bars, they have negligible resistance. So it's sort of like taking a garden hose and attaching a fatter piece of garden hose to the end that's like about 1 foot long. What effect does that have on the water coming out of your garden? It's the same amount of water coming out of your garden hose either way. And it's kind of, I think people get fooled by this stuff because it's like they don't realize how, when you're talking about tiny fractions of an ohm and vanishingly small amounts of capacitance and inductance, and you tack that onto a speaker cable which has measurable resistance, measurable capacitance, measurable inductance, none of those are high in a normal speaker cable. Those are all insignificant. And this thing is way more insignificant because it's a little tiny thing with these heavy copper bars, right?
This thing is supposedly, attenuating frequencies in the range of greater than 200,000 hertz. Now, we can hear up to, like, theoretically 20,000 hertz. I can actually only hear up to a little over 16,000 hertz, right? So, but let's just say 20,000 hertz. Okay. So let's say you've got noise in the frequency band around 200,000 hertz, and you don't have this thing that magically attenuates them. And you hit a speaker with 200,000 hertz noise. What's going to happen? How is the speaker going to handle that?
It's going to ignore it in the same way that you and I ignore the zillions of radio signals buzzing through the air all around us. We don't have the capacity to do anything with those signals.
What would a tweeter do with that signal?
The signal would, a tweeter has a standard tweeter has an inductive coil wrapped around. That's its voice coil, and it's an inductor. The high frequencies go in there to die.
So effectively, any tweeter is doing what this thing claims to do. Then, right? Basically. So
right,
yeah.
You do not need to RF filter your tweeters.
So we just saved you $1,600. You can send us a check for that if you want.
Yeah. Oh, and that's what these things cost? I didn't even see the price. Is that what they cost?
$1,600. I think I don't know if that's for a set of 4 or if that's a piece. Hang on. A set of 4 is $1,600. So they're, 400 and some odd a piece, 410, 420 a piece. Yeah.
So we should talk, though, about what are these guys saying this product does. And I have a great quote here from Hi-Fi Nights. And he's talking about his Bernanke W5 speakers. And he says, the firewall for loudspeakers decreased their wobble, injected moisture into landscapes in between them, brought key sound sources closer, made them more fluid and gutsier, and provided more powerful slam. Okay.
Well, that answers everything. What if we've been wasting our time talking about this crap?
But I can easily inject moisture between my speakers with stuff I have in my kitchen. I don't need to spend $1,600 to do that.
But no, I want moisture added to my music. How do I get moisture added?
It might get messy.
How do I add moisture to my music? That's the important thing. Oh, what is it?
So, well, this is new. I got to say, kudos to this guy whose name I can't pronounce. And that's a failure of me as an American, assuming that every name should have vowels in it.
Vowel centrism.
He has come up with at least 2 new terms here, which is the firewall for loudspeakers decrease their wobble. I mean, wobble? I mean, if the speaker has like a bad stand and it's bouncing back and the woofer is like really moving like crazy because you're playing, I don't know, Kanye West on it or something, and the speaker's wobbling. But I don't think these cables would do that unless they weighed it down maybe and stop. Okay, so you know what? That's plausible. All right, I'll give him credit. That is plausible that these heavy things hanging off the back of your speakers could decrease their wobble. Dennis, don't laugh. This is plausible. Okay. And injected moisture into landscapes between them. I'm lost on that one. And,
oh boy.
But he's bringing some new. Look, he's bringing some new complete BS into audio journalism, and you got to give him credit for that. Because most people just copy the same old BS that's been around for 30 years.
That's how we ended up with Inner Detail.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway.
So do you want to? I'm kind of tired of trashing ideas that are wrong and products that don't work. Can we move on to something that possibly does work?
Let's do it. That sounds like a great idea. You want to take a break and get some water?
All right.
And welcome back to Audio Unleashed. I am Dennis.
And I'm Brent.
And in this segment, we're going to be talking about a speaker that we saw on Stereophile's show coverage of The Show 2023. Now, admittedly, this article is a little bit old. It's from a few months ago, but I'm just seeing it because, Brent, you just shared it with me. And this is a write-up about MC Audiotech's new TL12 loudspeaker. Jason Victor Serenis wrote up a report about it and did a pretty good little, surface examination of the technology behind this. I had a little bit of familiarity with the technology, but you apparently have way more familiarity. So I'm going to ask you, Brent, what makes the speaker special?
Well, the reduced wobble and the increased moisture.
Oh, no. Oh, that's going to stick around, isn't it?
This thing would really sound good with some of those less lost doohickeys tacked on the back. All right. So anyway, this is MC Audiotech. I had actually not heard previously of them, and that's why it took me a while to discover this, because it's just like, here's another brand. But I looked at these things and I kind of read a little bit. I'm like, oh, this is back. Good. I liked this. And by this, I mean a tweeter design that I don't know how far it goes back, but I know it goes back at least to the mid 1990s. So what happens with this thing is there's a tweeter, and if you imagine 2 thin plastic sheets, right? You glue them together and then you bend them out so it looks kind of like a butt, right? Like 2 curves coming out, and you put a voice coil on the part where, just a thin coil of wire around the part where they're joined together. And then you suspend that between magnets and you run some voltage through the voice coil, and, you run AC, music from an amplifier through the voice coil, and the driver, the 2 diaphragms that are joined together move back and forth. And I guess the advantage of this thing is that it has an unusual dispersion pattern, right? So you've got the 2 curves moving back and forth, and they're really, really light as well. You can make them out of, really light, strong material. You don't have potentially less mass than a typical, tweeter with a typical voice coil. And you also have, you can get a lot of electromagnetic force, right, pushing this thing back and forth. And so it should do reasonably high SPLs, all other things being equal. And the dispersion characteristics are, since you have the two curves, the two butts, or this one butt.
Okay, Beavis.
Moving in and out, and they're both curved. But anyway, the two curves move in and out and radiate sound. And since they're curved, they're radiating in a really, really, really broad and even dispersion pattern across, I guess, all frequencies of sound. I would think that since it's two radiating surfaces next to each other, you're going to get a little bit of interference between them, but it's going to be at very high frequencies since they're right next to each other. And it's probably just a little bit of randomness in the middle, right on axis with the tweeter, but it's going to be generally really, really broad and even dispersion. Now, I will say I have never measured one of these, and I don't know that any, maybe John Atkinson did like 30 years ago. I think Stereophile reviewed, I was going to say, I'm babbling here, so jump in if you feel the need. There was a company called Linnaeum, Linnaeum, that was based in Portland, and back in the 90s. And I visited their factory in Portland, and they actually made these things there. And they were actually making a Linnaeum-based speaker for Radio Shack, and it was like a little bookshelf speaker that was probably $250 a pair or something like that, maybe somewhere in there, and had probably like a 5 1/4 inch woofer and one of these tweeters on the top. And one thing about this tweeter is you can make it with one butt or two butts, and one butt can fire forward and one butt can fire back, and so you can get like a big spacious sound that's reminiscent of an electrostatic speaker, like a Martin Logan, right? Or you can make it with just one butt and close off the back end, and it works like a normal tweeter.
Back when we were doing the Soundstage Audiophile podcast, when we were just getting started, I had put a YouTube video in I think I'd put it in our idea board, and for whatever reason, we were still trying to figure out our format, so it kind of got lost in the mix. But there's a video by Homemade Audio from about 1.5 years ago where he homemade a speaker that he was replicating something called a Rubinoid speaker, and instead of doing a butt, it's two butts back to back, so it forms an 8. So it's a 360. It's an omnidirectional speaker built in the same principle. So you look at it and you're kind of like, wait, is that an electrostat? Is it? No. Is that like a ribbon? No. Is it like a dynamic? No. It's a really, really neat and interesting thing. So we will put a link to that video in the show notes. I think people should check it out, because seeing this in motion, even though this is sort of a 360 thing and it's two butts stuck together, it's still the same principle and you can understand it. So.
Yeah, so on the MC Audio-Tech TL12, and these are not cheap. These are $25,000 to $29,000 a pair, depending on finishes and options. They have, I'm too lazy to scroll down. It looks like a 12-inch
transmission line woofer. Yeah.
Anyway, he stacked 3 of these things on top of the woofer, and so it's functioning as a line array. So it's going to have kind of controlled dispersion from, top and bottom, and then really broad dispersion on the sides. And he's actually got vents on the side that let the drivers vent out the back, so that you get some of that, I would imagine, some of that feeling of an electrostatic speaker. So my guess is these would sound something kind of like a Martin Logan speaker, except that they don't look like a big screen thing. They just, like, at first glance, they look like kind of normal speakers.
They're really beautiful, and they are big.
As we have discussed many times on this show, there are a lot of speakers that do not pique my curiosity, but these do. And there's the ones that pique my curiosity, there's 2 kinds. One of them piques my curiosity because I know it's going to be a total train wreck and I still want to go hear it, right? But these pique my curiosity because I bet these are good.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you just look at the sort of surface level specifications, it looks like it's a speaker that probably a lot of people could probably easily experiment with. 92 dB sensitivity that's specified. That's really good. So you don't need a lot of amplification with this thing. Nominal impedance is 8 ohms. So you probably don't have any really, really big impedance dips that are going to challenge an amp to deliver more current than it can. Frequency range of 28 hertz to 20 kilohertz. This is going to give you really, really full range sound without needing a sub. Now we can argue about whether it's better to have a 2.1 system or stereo towers, but still, this is high-end audio that is it's not stupid. Like you're looking at it going, that could be really, really cool.
Yeah, I really think this, and another advantage is, since these are big versions of these drivers, they're not tweeters, they're really like mid tweeters.
They're everything above 300 hertz.
Yeah, so you don't have a crossover right in the middle of the vocal range at 2 or 2.5 or 3 kilohertz, right? And granted, there are plenty of people that do a great job of crossovers that you can't hear, but this doesn't have a crossover there. So it's kind of like Martin Logan's. Those big panels are usually crossed over at, 300 or something like that to the woofer. And I'm kind of excited about these speakers. I really want to hear them. I guess I would have to go to an audio show again. I haven't been to an audio show in ages.
They have a lot of those near you now, don't they?
Yeah, they have at least one in the Seattle area. They might have one in Portland. And of course, I can get on a plane. I really should get out there a little bit more. And I'll wear an Audio Unleashed podcast t-shirt.
Oh, great. Now I have to make t-shirts.
And I'll
good.
design them.
Good.
That's fine. That'd be really funny. Maybe I'll do that, because I would, I'm sure there's probably a lot of speakers I really like to hear. And, there's a lot of brands I haven't caught up with in a long time, like Von Schweikert, because I knew Albert really well, and his son Albert passed away, and his son has taken over the company and seems to be doing a great job. And I would love to go hear what he's up to. And, and then of course it's always fun to go see some wackadoodle stuff that doesn't make any sense at all. And, they probably don't listen to our podcast anyway, so they probably don't even know we're trashing them.
I think sometimes you watch audio the way people watch NASCAR, man. You're in it for the wrecks.
Oh, totally. And that's one thing I love about measurement is like most stuff measures kind of okay. Some stuff measures great, but once in a while you get a real train wreck, which means your measurement session is going to take 2 or 3 times as long while you try to figure out why is it so bad. But then you start to go, this thing's just bad. But then you can revel in it, and then you get to write it up, and you go like, well, this thing, and you got to look at like Stereophile and the measurements in there that John Atkinson does, and I really get the impression that when something's just a train wreck, he loves to write about it.
There is a little bit of, he's coy about it though.
Don't
he's coy about it. So
yeah.
Anyway, man.
Yeah, I'm not as coy. I try to be nice.
You try, but yeah. Anyway. So what do you think?
Oh, so I was going to say this leaves me with a question though. It's like, this driver's been around for decades, and why hasn't it really taken off? Because Lineam went out of business. Radio Shack is sadly gone, and God, do I miss Radio Shack? But and Lineam lasted a few years. I guess they shut down. I guess they weren't getting anywhere or whatever. But they had, their speakers had like a tower speaker for I want to say 800, but it was, I think it was like a 6.5 inch with one of these drivers on top. And I heard it at a show, and it was one of the best things I heard at the show. And I was just like, maybe I should just get a pair of these things. And then I kind of got distracted, as I often do, by my job. And I had piles and piles of speakers to review. And usually the more the speakers pile up and the more the products pile up, the less interested I actually am in products. Yeah, obviously.
Anyway, man, do you want to wrap this thing up for the week? And although we've got another segment coming for our patrons, but let's wrap it up for everybody else and do some credits, man.
I think you have to give the production credit.
I do. Well, you're going to be mixing and mastering and editing this thing, man. It's your turn.
But what is this?
This is a Butterburger production. I'm sorry. I was not picking up what you were laying down. What are we doing for music this time around?
Well, I think the first tune will be based on the new quasi fake drum recording you gave me, which I'm going to put a nice melody to, and something that kids can dance to. And the second one will be probably whatever I can dredge up from my archive. You know what? The second one, I think I'm going to play some music from our good friend Terry Landry.
Nice.
Wonderful saxophone player and composer based down in LA, who's recorded with a zillion people and toured with a zillion people and plays a zillion gigs and has a pretty good inkling of how to write music. And
very nice. Thought leader represent. Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, he also goes by, follow Thought Leader on Instagram.
if you're brave enough. Well, cool.
Yeah, you'll end up with a new perspective on life. It's kind of like doing mushrooms or something. You're gonna the effect will be notable.
Yeah. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for listening this week, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And patrons, stick around. We got one more for you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/Audio Unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/Audio Unleashed.
Or Audio
Unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.